In America, city officials will look you in the eye and insist that no-go zones do not exist. They claim law enforcement has total control over every street, but the reality on the ground tells a completely different story. Across the country, there are specific blocks where squad cars refuse to patrol and emergency calls go unanswered. What nobody wants to admit is why the police were ordered to abandon those blocks. Here are the 5 U.S. neighborhoods that police refuse to enter. Parkway Gardens in Chicago, Illinois, is better known by its street name O Block. Located on the 6,400 block of South King Drive, this sprawling apartment complex has earned the grim reputation of being the most dangerous street in America. But it is not just the staggering homicide rate that makes it unique. It is the physical architecture of the neighborhood itself. The entire complex is walled off and heavily gated, and local street gangs, primarily the Black Disciples, have turned it into a literal fortress. When a violent crime occurs inside the gates, the first responding police cruisers do not rush in to secure the scene. Instead, they park their vehicles on the perimeter. They are forced to wait for overwhelming tactical backup before walking through the iron fences. The gang members know this tactical delay exists, and they use that window of time to erase evidence and disappear into the brutalist concrete buildings. The police department effectively ceded control of the inner courtyards because the architectural design makes it impossible to patrol safely. O Block proved that a highly organized group could physically barricade law enforcement out of a neighborhood, but a physical barricade is only one way to defeat the police. What happens when an entire massive avenue in a major East Coast city simply swallows law enforcement alive? Welcome to Kensington Avenue in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Walking down this stretch of pavement feels like stepping into a dystopian nightmare. Thousands of people suffer openly from severe fentanyl and trank addiction, while armed syndicates operate highly organized drug markets in broad daylight. The police presence here is entirely different from the barricaded gates of O Block. You will actually see squad cars parked right on the avenue, but the officers do not arrest the dealers. They sit behind bulletproof glass and watch the narcotics trade happen right in front of their eyes. This creates an immediate mystery. Why would heavily armed Philadelphia police officers ignore blatant felony distribution happening just 10 feet from their bumpers? The answer lies in a strategy called the containment approach. If the police arrest the dealers, the market fragments and spreads into the wealthy adjacent neighborhoods of Center City. Therefore, the department tolerates the open-air market to keep the chaos pinned to a single zip code. But the moment the city implicitly agreed to this trade-off, the street syndicates realized they had complete immunity. They expanded their operations. This same phenomenon recently infected San Francisco, California. In the Tenderloin district, organized fencing rings set up massive street markets selling stolen electronics and retail goods. The police union eventually issued statements warning tourists to stay away because the city simply did not have the manpower to reclaim the sidewalks. The gangs essentially realized that if they created enough simultaneous chaos, the bureaucracy would simply collapse under the sheer weight of the paperwork. The police did not lose a shootout. They lost a war of attrition. The direct consequence of this street-level surrender is absolute devastation for the working-class citizens trapped inside these borders. The residents of Kensington and the Tenderloin still pay city taxes. They still desperately dial 911 when their homes are broken into, but they are met with automated hold messages or wait times that stretch into 3 or 4 hours. The social contract we mentioned at the beginning is completely broken for these specific people. They have been sacrificed. When we look at Chicago, Philadelphia, and San Francisco, the surface level story seems obvious. The police are simply overwhelmed by gang architecture, drug epidemics, and underfunded departments. They retreat because they do not have the resources to hold the line. That answers the immediate question of how these specific streets became untouchable. But the story does not end there. In fact, everything we just covered is merely a symptom of a much darker and deeply intentional urban strategy. The police did not just naturally retreat from these neighborhoods because the streets were too dangerous. The terrifying truth is that decades ago, city planners specifically engineered these zones to become exactly what they are today. To understand the real reason these 5 neighborhoods have been abandoned, we have to travel to Los Angeles, California. Just blocks away from the glittering skyscrapers of the financial district sits Skid Row. This is 50 square blocks of total misery where thousands of tents line the concrete and emergency services operate essentially as body collectors. For years, the public assumed Skid Row naturally evolved into a hellscape because of rising housing costs and addiction. But in 1976, the city of Los Angeles drafted a literal policy document officially named the Containment Plan. The goal was deeply sinister. City officials wanted to protect the rapidly gentrifying downtown real estate market. Therefore, they intentionally directed all the shelters, soup kitchens, and rehabilitation services into one specific 50-block radius. They purposefully engineered a magnet for poverty and crime. Once the population was corralled into this specific zone, the police department quietly shifted its tactics. They stopped enforcing low-level warrants and property crimes inside the borders. They stopped trying to fix the neighborhood. They simply formed a perimeter to ensure the chaos never spilled over into the wealthy financial sector. The stakes suddenly skyrocket when you realize Skid Row is not a failure of law enforcement. It is a highly successful feature of city planning. This exact blueprint was recently deployed in Phoenix, Arizona, with catastrophic results. Right behind the state capitol building, a massive encampment known locally as the Zone exploded in size. At its peak, nearly 1,000 unhoused individuals and organized criminal elements took over the streets. Local business owners who ran metal shops and auto garages suddenly found themselves in a war zone. They called the police every day to report rampant property destruction and violent assaults. But the Phoenix police stopped responding. They simply refused to enter the encampment. The business owners were entirely baffled. They had video evidence of the crimes, and the perpetrators were sitting on the sidewalk. But the officers told the property owners they were under strict orders not to engage. This forces a terrifying question. Who exactly was giving the police the order to stand down and to abandon tax-paying businesses? The answer came when those same property owners filed a massive civil lawsuit against the city of Phoenix. During the court proceedings, it was revealed that city officials deliberately maintained the zone to avoid legal challenges from activist groups about homeless sweeps. The city calculated that it was cheaper and politically safer to sacrifice the local business owners than to enforce the law. In effect, the police were weaponized in reverse. Their absence was used as a tool of political convenience. The court ultimately ruled in favor of the business owners and forced the city to clean up the neighborhood, but the damage was already embedded in the system. The precedent was completely set. City halls across America realized they possessed the ultimate power. They could simply erase a neighborhood from the protection of the state by telling the police chief to ignore the radio traffic. The ultimate aftermath of these containment strategies is a deeply fractured America. When you look back at the gated fortress of Chicago O Block, the drug markets of Kensington, and the engineered despair of Skid Row, the true picture finally snaps into focus. These are not just dangerous neighborhoods where the cops are too scared to walk the beat. They are deliberate quarantine zones. The police are not failing to enforce the law. They are perfectly enforcing an invisible border. City governments have silently agreed that a certain level of violence and despair is entirely acceptable, as long as it happens to the right people in the right zip codes. By sacrificing these 5 districts, politicians can keep the wealthy suburbs artificially safe and clean. We finally understand who benefits from the lack of police presence. But there is one final detail that city officials are terrified the public will figure out. These designated containment zones are rapidly reaching their maximum physical capacity. The borders of places like Kensington and Skid Row cannot hold any more people. Therefore, municipal governments are secretly drafting new zoning laws to establish secondary containment areas farther out from city centers. This means the invisible border is creeping outward, and the next neighborhood the police are ordered to abandon might be yours. Click here to check out another crime documentary.